Hi, my name's Ryan and welcome to The Talking Donkey. The world is full of bizarre and bamboozling questions. Questions that stump me and stupefy me to no end. We want to talk about those kinds of questions here on this show. Questions about specifically God and faith. And the question that we're going to ask and talk about today is, how does a merciful God condemn people? That is a question that I don't want to answer alone. And so I have with me Seno. Seno.
G'day.
Welcome.
I feel welcome.
That's good. Tell me, this question for me is a bit difficult. I feel like there's a lot of emotion behind it, and I think there's a lot of stakes as well. Do you find this question difficult or interesting, or what is your take, or what's your initial gut reaction on this question?
I only find it hard when I have to answer it. I think it cuts to the heart of a lot of things, that people expect God to be kind and loving and merciful, and why God isn't like that. Why God isn't like that to everyone.
Yeah.
And I think it's messy and complicated, because we know there's people we definitely don't want God to be kind to and merciful and loving to. But broadly speaking, we want God to be kind and loving to everyone but those people.
Yeah.
The guy who cuts me off in the traffic.
Yeah. You want
and
God
Hitler.
You want God to smite them.
And Hitler, and everyone else.
But everyone else is okay, yeah. I've got a quote from a random guy on the internet from Reddit. Do you know what Reddit is? Have you been on Reddit before?
Kind of, yes.
Okay. Well, without getting into detail, I'll show this quote, which I think kind of emphasizes the difficulty of this question and all the things that are going on behind the scenes. So here it is. The Christian God damns to hell those who don't believe in him while refusing to prove his existence. Why would you want to worship a God who intentionally screws you over like that, let's say? That's kind of a dog move, if you ask me.
I love the way you handle that, Ryan.
We're a Christian podcast. What do you expect? But I think that really gets to the heart of what people are feeling when they're actually asking this question. And I think on this show, what we want to do is not just give some arbitrary answer, but we want to understand that this means something to people. That people get angry at this kind of thoughts, or even at our answers. And we want to take that seriously.
Well, the truth is, we get a bit antsy about it as well. And these are questions that plague Christians. The reasons these questions are asked are not because all of a sudden there's a group of people who aren't Christian, who are anti-theist or whatever. It's because Christians have asked these questions. This question came from a Christian person. And they're struggling with this idea of balancing the mercy of God with what? With judgment, justice, hell, that idea. Yeah,
I think that's a good segue. Well, the first thing I kind of want to talk about with this is that idea of justice. Because to say condemned, that's a, I don't know, like a legal kind of word. It's like you're pronouncing someone guilty, right? So how do you see justice in this question? What's your view? What's your take on that, would you say?
Well, perhaps what we ought to think about is the idea of accountability. That is, justice and judgment sounds harsh, but accountability doesn't sound that harsh. And we do hold each other accountable. We hold ourselves accountable for things. And we do that because we care. So think about the coach. The coach who really dislikes you is the coach who's not going to hold you accountable, who doesn't care about you. The coach who goes hard at you, who judges what you do, and who holds you accountable for the way you act, that's a good coach. Same with parents, same with any authority figure. Accountability is actually, I think, a good thing in that sense. It wouldn't be right to let bad behaviour or bad actions go and just let them go and say they don't matter. It matters what I do to you. It matters what you do to me. So I think accountability is actually important and good. And so in that sense, I think that idea of justice is actually important.
Yeah, and I think you're right there. In terms of how we view things in society is exactly like that. There are people who we think need to be in jail because they have done actions that we consider wrong. And they need to be put somewhere else. But the thing that kind of comes to my mind immediately is, well, there are people in which we don't do that to. There are people in which we don't hold them accountable for their actions, or we would maybe lower their we say they don't have much agency.
Yes, but they tend to be people like babies. And so we don't hold a baby accountable the same way we hold an adult accountable. We don't, and also we control them. I guess we do things for them.
Yeah.
But by and large, for human beings, if you're a grown-up adult, we don't do that. Matter of fact, with kids, that's exactly the thing, isn't it? That we're growing them towards having their own agency, their responsibility for their own actions.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're doing. And so we may compromise it for a short time, but that's in order to give it to them later, so that they'll be an adult who actually understands what it means to be responsible for their choices. And adults who don't understand that are immature and they're really awful. You know, those kind of people who don't understand that they're responsible for what they do.
Yeah, we all know that kind of person who just seems to do things and not care what other people say or do about that.
Yeah. And so I think that's flipping the question around. So I think the issue is, how can God damn people? How can God hold people accountable? But the question there is, how can God not allow people to make their own decision? Is it loving to deny someone's agency? So if God just said, it doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to do this, how does that fit with somebody's agency? How does it fit to say to somebody, it doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to do this to you. I'm going to do this for you, and not take into account their decision? Is it loving to actually do something to someone that they don't want?
Yeah, that's a good point. And from the way that I think about it as well, I think you're right. But this, for me, the idea that we live in God's world, and God cares about what we do, and part of that giving us agency. But He also, when we hurt other people, when we mess up this world, God cares about that and says that actually means something to Him. And yeah, I can see that if He didn't care, then He wouldn't hold us responsible. And so it's almost, the problem is that we have a God who cares.
Have a God who cares, and who's given us agency over our own lives, who said your choices are your choices, and they're important because of that. And if someone said to you, none of your choices are important, they don't matter because I'm deciding everything, then that you would not be happy with that. We would have other problems. Yes. And so this is the thing. This is one of those. It's a trap for us, really, because either way, we find ourselves unhappy and in trouble. Rather unhappy that God holds us accountable, or we're unhappy because God doesn't give us control of our lives, doesn't actually value our choices and value us therefore as people. And so I think that's a big issue with it. But it's more than that, isn't it? Because when we use the language of judgment, when we say God damns people, we're assuming that we're passive victims. God has condemned you. God has sent you to hell. And God is one who does it, and I'm just the passive recipient, the victim of God's action. But that's not quite true either, is it, from what we've been saying? From what we've been saying, I think a better way to phrase the question would be, if God is merciful, why do people end up damned or in hell or condemned? When you put it this way, you can see that, well, nobody is an innocent actor in that sense. Nobody's just an innocent bystander who gets caught up in God's terrible actions. No, we're all participants. We all actually make choices, and we choose this thing. And certainly the Bible talks about that in several places. It talks about the fact that God has given people enough for them to know certain things and to know certain things about Him. So, yeah.
And I think that's hard in one way, just because it's hard to take responsibility for your own actions. At least for me personally, my gut reaction is to run away or ignore it or blame someone else, I suppose. And so hearing those things, I can get if people struggle with that, because it's hard. And it doesn't feel good. But I think that's a good way to move into the next part that I want to talk about, the other part of the question, and that's the idea of mercy. Because it seems that we didn't really understand. So let me rephrase that. Agency is something that we have and that God's given us, and God takes that seriously. so much so that he doesn't want to compromise our agency. So where does mercy fit into that? What does it mean that God's merciful when our actions matter and we have maybe stuffed up?
It's a really good question. I think part of the answer to this is that mercy is a free action from God. No one's obligated to show mercy. Mercy is actually in that sense a free action. And so God's not obliged to show mercy to anyone. But the fact of the matter is God has offered mercy to everyone. And so God's mercy is there and able to be chosen. And we get back to that idea of, well, your agency therefore matters. What you choose to do with God's mercy matters. That is, God says, I've been merciful to you by sending Jesus who died in your place and who's risen from the dead. If you look to Jesus, you can have mercy from me. I won't damn you. And so there's an agency question there. And so I think that's probably a big part of this answer is that God has actually offered mercy. God is not simply there with a big cosmic fly swat smacking us down. He's offered mercy.
Yeah, and so that's I find that part interesting. The idea that there's this new sense of agency that we have, that we can actually choose to accept the mercy of God, or we can choose to live our own way, I suppose, and try and deal with these things ourselves and come up with our own ideas. Yeah.
And so we might even rephrase the question again. If God is merciful, why is it that people choose to be damned?
Yeah, from our perspective, that seems crazy.
That would be the Christian way to phrase the question. If God is merciful, why do people choose to be damned? And that in itself raises a whole lot of other things, I think, for us to talk about. But I think that covers probably the main basis for thinking about this question of why, if God is merciful, why does he damn people? I think we've ended up at probably a better way of phrasing that. Why is it that people choose to be damned? Why is it that people refuse God's mercy and love?
Yeah, great. So to summarize, let's see if I've understood this correctly. With the question, why would a merciful God condemn people? Well, the idea is that we actually are moral people who can make decisions and are held accountable for our actions. And so, and God cares about what we do and cares about the wrongs that we do, either to ourselves, to others, or to the world that we live in, or even to God himself. And so the question, the actual situation that we find ourselves in is that we are actually stuck in this kind of position, that God is going to do something about the wrongs that we've done. The merciful side of God is that he actually gives us the option or the ability through Jesus to not receive what will come because of the
what we deserve.
What we deserve. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Nailed it.
Thanks. Well, I think that'll be it for today's episode. I hope that we have at least begun to help you understand that question and give some form of an answer to it. If not, please drop a comment below and let us know what you think we've missed, or if you have an extra question that you want to add that you don't think we hit well, ask that question and we'd love to hit you back on that. But otherwise, thanks for joining.